For the longest time, I've believed that the number one goal for all of us is to become who we really are. So this video is about pivoting and the permission we all seek to do what we want, to become who we are. If nobody actually cared what you did, would you do things differently? Or would you do different things? And if you were incapable of worrying what others thought of you, would you wake up tomorrow and make all the same decisions? My career began in the thrilling world of retail banking, but fortunately I was spared a life of certain vanilla by a very encouraging dad, mine, and an art director who spotted something in me. What followed was 15 years of absolute creative liberation, lots of travel and experiences that no amount of money could ever buy, no matter how rich you are. And everything was wonderful until I convinced myself that a guaranteed income and money and status, much of which afforded by said money, were far more important than doing what you actually love. And so I ran off the rails for a decade or so, until, that is, my second divorce, and then the death of a close friend. After John's passing, I started writing again, and then I picked up a camera again for the first time in years, and it all started to come back to me. I remembered what made me happy, what gave me energy and hope. So I started a blog, and then another one, and another one, and then a podcast, and I wrote a book. And then I posted a video here on YouTube, and bit by bit, it all began to make sense. I was still, as I had always been, a creative person with technical ability, rather than a technical person capable of creativity. Of course, with each new project, I was nervous and I was awkward, especially in front of a camera. But I remembered a statement that I'd heard some 30 odd years ago from a man whose name escapes me. And he said, "What you think of me is none of my business." And so that's the mantra that's carried me through my midlife reinvention, if you want to call it that. What you think of me is none of my business. Because as I've also learned, no matter what I do, the people that matter don't mind, and the people that mind don't matter. When you've been alive for a while, you become conditioned to believe certain things about yourself. You know, I develop websites and marketing programs because I have decades of experience in that. I'm good at it. It pays well. It's what I'm known for amongst my clients. But that's also a story that I've created for myself, and I can change it if I want to. And so, for example, if that voice in your head says, I might be a C-suite executive, but I'd like to try this thing over here, well then that voice gets beaten down by a ton of evidence telling you, no, you shouldn't try any of that. You're going to look silly in front of your friends. You're going to be terrible at it. Don't even bother. And most of us have been guilty of this at one time or another. But as you get older, though, you realise that there's no one to prove anything to except yourself. The person in the mirror is the one that you need to satisfy. And providing you don't throw out the baby with the bathwater and, abandon your responsibilities, you absolutely can, and likely should, invest energy and self-education and practice into something that makes you happy, that brings joy into your life. And to hell with what anybody else thinks of it. I grew up with a love of the outdoors, thanks to the endless hours exploring the creek just over the road from our house, swimming down the beach, camping with my dad, lots of this outdoorsy stuff. And from that also grew a love of cars and motorcycles, trail bike riding, photography, and music, which my sister was really into. So I ended up getting into music. And all of these things took a huge chunk of my attention and my interest growing up. And they remain so to this day, all of those things. I love all of them. So clearly a bank was never the right place for me, even though I excelled at it and was promoted through the ranks very quickly. And this kind of highlights a point. Just because you can do something, even because you are really good at something, doesn't mean you should do that something. It doesn't mean you have to stay with it forever. You can do other things, difficult things, exciting things that make you spring out of bed at 5 a.m. like a 10-year-old on Christmas morning, which is kind of where I find myself right now. Over the last few years, I've become fairly good at pursuing my dreams, and some of my more recent ones, like getting back into photography, learning how to shoot video, and starting a YouTube channel, they've been some of the most satisfying of all. Likewise, creating some of my recent videos on the Porsche 911 and Boxster have been a huge amount of fun. Yesterday my wife made an interesting observation. She said, "You can talk about cars for hours and hours, but not photography. And she's right. You know, I love photography and I always will. I've loved it since I was 12 and I reckon I'll love it until I croak. But weave an interesting car into the mix and then it's really enjoyable for me. In fact, one of my favourite things to do back in my car photography days was to take a press car for the day or for a weekend and just go exploring, looking for beautiful places to shoot it. You know, 90% of the work was looking for beautiful locations which were good enough to shoot just on their own as landscape locations. Or architectural locations. And I really enjoyed that. So finding a place that stood on its own, but then placing a car in it, it was challenging and it was interesting, and I really, really enjoyed that part of my job. It wasn't uncommon for me to get up, you know, hours before dawn to drive to a location in the hope that there might be something decent in the way of a location there to shoot a car at dawn. Often it didn't work out, but it was still enjoyable, still huge fun. I loved it. So this is what I'm going to start aiming for, is more of that. Beautiful landscapes, interesting cars. Cars and landscapes. Two of the things that I've always loved since I was a kid. And as a decades-long photographer and car lover and nature lover and failure at many things, I'm sure I'll be sharing thoughts on those topics as we go. You might not approve. After all, you know me as a landscape photographer. But like you, I am many things. And life is short and death is long. So the last thing I want is to have had a dream of doing something and not tried it. Anyway, I hope you approve. I hope you stick around. But if you don't, that's fine. After all, what you think of me and what you think of this is really none of my business. So this is who I am. A husband, a father, a fortunate son of wonderful parents, but also a photographer, an outdoorsman, a car nut, and a YouTuber. So I have a question for you. Who are you, really?